Hello, Admiral Thrawn here. I'm bringing you what will be the final map preview for the upcoming mod, Call of Warhammer Beginning of the End Times. Now, if you've been keeping up to date on the videos on my channel so far, then you should. A lot of this stuff will be a rehash because a lot of stuff I'll be showing off and talking about a second time around. But at the end, I will be bringing up the new improvements we've made to Strea and Kimry and Nagaroth. So stick around for those if you want, or just skip ahead if you really want to. But yeah, I'll basically be going over the campaign as it stands right now and describing all the various new mechanics we've added, the balancing we've done, and just sort of explaining the thinking behind a lot of what we've done. So here, I'm gonna toggle the fog of war to show it off. So first of all, let's start with the basics. We inherited the Empire map here from the Call of Warhammer 1.6 team. They did a great job with this, with the navigable rivers and all that stuff. Now, we did have to cut down a lot of the settlements because there's a hard-coded limit in Medieval 2 of 200 settlements, which is too bad, but it's, you know, what can you do? And so basically, using that, we have had to mess around with making it so that it's more sort of usable. So what we've done is we've left a lot of the major cities and towns. A lot of the castles we've turned into permanent forts. There's no limit on those. And so, for example, Castle Rexgard, where Kurt, the Rex Marshal, hangs out, is now a permanent fort. Which makes some sense. It doesn't really make sense to have this little tiny castle region over here next to Altdorf. That should be part of the province, like the main Reichland province here. Now, another thing we've done as well is we've revamped the resources for towns. So, for example, this right here is a town, or a village, and so merchants can trade there and sell goods to the village and buy goods from them. And so you won't be able to recruit from there, but of course you can basically send merchants there, and it provides some extra fluff for the campaign map. We've also done some changes to the map, like the map itself. For example, Middenheim is up here on its mountain. Middenheim is one of the most defensible cities in the old world, and so basically, if you want to attack it, you basically have to go up this perilous, narrow causeway up to the city and attack it that way. And first, of course, you have to take the fort down here. And so it's much harder to take a city like Middenheim. The same goes for Marienburg, the great port of the old world. Here it's on an island with a small bridge leading to the mainland, which is in the middle of a swamp. And so in order to attack Marienburg, you will have to cross the bridge. That being said, as a warning, the forces of Nurgle will attack Marienburg. This is the end times after all, and Blotkin will come in and wreck stuff. And so definitely be wary of that if you're playing as the Dogs of War. Now, speaking of the Dogs of War, one thing we've done is we've replaced the Border Princess faction with the Dogs of War faction. Now, the Dogs of War will start in Tilia and the Border Princess region. And basically they are sort of a loose collection of mercenaries and sellswords that are basically working together for the common good, even though they aren't really a united empire. And so they'll have to deal with a lot. For one thing, the orcs will be basically attacking up through the border princes and will just basically be causing a lot of trouble for them. Meanwhile, down here in Tilia, they will be advancing up along the coast, taking these cities. One reason to take cities in Tilia, just as a side note, is they will all have unique mercenary buildings. So, for example, Richter Kruger, the head of the Cursed Company, he commands an army of undead that he personally controls. His sepulcher, basically the place where he hangs out, will be in one of the Tilian cities. And so if you capture that city, you can then recruit the Cursed Company from that city alone. And so for every new city you conquer, not only is it a different battle because you're fighting different regiments of renown, you can then add those regiments to your army as you advance north. And the same goes in the Border Princes area, where basically you will be able to recruit the normal Border Princes roster from these cities, even if you're the Empire. So if Reichland were to go down here and occupy these cities, they could then raise local Border Prince levies as well as their normal state troops. So basically it makes a lot of sense for, like, say, Reichland to be able to have provincial armies on top of their regular ones. The same goes for conquests in Estalia and Araby. where if you were to conquer the cities in these areas, you can then recruit Estalian and Arabian troops, which will then bolster your units. And so yeah, that's mostly it for the old world. All the Empire factions are still here. Sylvania, of course, causing trouble. Though as for the vampire counts, they will have something interesting going on. See, we're trying to include the various vampire bloodlines and lore related to them. And so on top of holding Sylvania and Mucilon, the vampires will also basically, and of course, Bloodkeep, which is the center of the Blood Dragons, one of the coolest bloodlines of the vampires. There will also be quests in the game, possibly not in 1.0, but definitely in a later release, where basically the Skiriogi vampires, or I think I pronounced that right, they're basically vampire gypsies. They originally ruled the Empire of Styrgos down in the Badlands before the orcs crushed them. And so they want to reclaim their homeland of Morcane. And so there's a good chance that basically a vampire play will have bonuses if they march south here and take this. The vampires will control Silver Pinnacle, where the Lamian vampires, ruled by Neferata, will be hanging out. And the Lamians will have their own special quests, possibly to reclaim the actual city of Lamia. And then finally, we're thinking of having late-game quests, where basically around here in Nagashazar, the Tower of Nagash, there will be some quests where basically you have to converge on here at the last second to either stop Nagash or summon him. But that will probably be in a later release. Right now we're trying to get the current version out the door. So, anyways, so that's the vampires, what they're up to. There's also going to be a vampire sub-faction in Lustria for the vampire pirates that hang out there on the Vampire Coast. But I'll show them off when I show off Lustria. Up here, we have the glorious Ice Kingdom of Kislev. They have their vast rolling steppes. This is such a big kingdom that you basically want to probably rely heavily on cavalry in order to cover all the ground. But basically, they seem really big and powerful right now, but they're going to have a lot of problems because just up here in Norska, it's basically all bad news. First of all, of course, you have the Skaven of Hellpit. They may seem pretty small and insignificant, but basically up here is, I believe, Clan Molder, and they are responsible for making all the badass Skaven war monsters. And so basically, you're going to have to deal with a lot of rat ogres and a lot of other horrible Skaven beasts and horribleness that are basically going to be attacking Sop and Kislev. They always get pretty far, and they always do a lot of damage. At the same time, the real threat, of course, is Chaos Undivided. Archaon the Everchosen will basically start here in the middle of Norska, and he's basically going to be marching south and crushing everything in his path. He's probably going to start taking out the remaining kind of sort of good guy Norse tribes. Like, there are some good Norse up there. I mean, there's like Ragnar, for example. Him and his wolves are really into fighting chaos. And so Ragnar's wolves will be based here, and if the Empire conquers this place, they can then recruit Ragnar's wolves. But this place falls really fast, because the Everchosen is a badass and he's going to kill everything. And on top of that, there's also some other chaos forces scattered around here in Norska, up here in like the mountains and the forests. Basically, all of the four chaos factions, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, will have starting ports that they can then use to raid the Empire and land in Nordland and cause problems. But really, the Everchosen and Chaos Undivided is going to be the main threat up here. They're the brown on the campaign map. And so they're going to be marching, and they're going to be calling crusades against the Empire. One thing we've done is we've switched the crusade mechanics, so instead of the Empire calling crusades against our people, now the Everchosen calls crusades against the Empire. And basically the Skaven, the Chaos Dwarves, and of course the main Chaos factions will basically then be able to march their crusading armies down and take Outdorf, for example. And so you're going to have crusades, you're going to have wars, of course. Basically, the jihad mechanic has been repurposed for the orcs, and so orcs will war against the Empire. And so yeah, that should be a lot of fun. I personally had a lot of trouble with these. So speaking of which, one thing that you've been asking a lot about on ModDB is whether we'll still have these massive Doom spawns. See, in 1.6, what would happen is, around turn 50 or so, like 30 stacks of Chaos troops would basically appear out of nowhere in the middle of the Empire and attack. So we've gotten rid of that completely. Now basically it's going to be these crusades that will basically actually be built and will march south from the Chaos Wastes. So if you have defenses in Kislev, those defenses will be the first line that will probably fall. But basically, you will be able to defend out here instead of having to wait for the stacks to spawn over here. That being said, there will be some spawning. For example, Beastmen will from time to time appear in the forests of the old world and attack you. There's really nothing you can do about that apart from destroying Chaos itself. So if you destroy Chaos Divided, the Beastmen will stop spawning. But until that happens, the Beastmen will basically appear and attack your cities, and there's not much you can do about it, apart from just leaving behind garrisons. That's because in the old world, basically the forests are so huge and so dense, there's no way you could actually root out the Beastmen, and so the Empire really just sort of hid in their hovels and prayed the Beastmen didn't attack them. So further north, you have some Norse dwarves up here in Norska. They'll have some cool special units and all with their awesome Viking horn helmets and stuff. But further north than that, you have the actual Chaos Wastes. Now, I have a preview video basically showing this in detail, but I'll just go over it really quickly, where the Chaos Wastes are now a lot more, say, quote-unquote, chaotic. So over here you have Khorne's main area, with his massive lava mountains, and of course, the ground around his fortress is littered with the bones of dragons and giants and all sorts of other enemies that have fought there. He is the blood god after all. He has a giant skull throne, so it makes sense he'd have bones lying around. Further to the west, you have Tzeentch. He has basically this whole area here, these mountains that are basically slowly being mutated by his mutation powers. His area here on the battle map will basically be a desert, because in Warhammer, magic is weird and magic creates stuff like this. See, the Chaos Waste isn't just like a frozen wasteland, and it's not just like lava. It's got all sorts of nonsense going on there. You have these massive pillars of magical energy jutting out from the ground. Here you have Infernius. This is basically a giant hollowed-out volcano with a settlement in the middle of it. So basically you can attack the settlement and fight this awesome battle in the middle of the volcano. That's a lot of fun to fight in. Here you have, of course, Nurgle's area. The Gardens of Nurgle are basically these plague-infested, disease-ridden swamps up in the northern Chaos Wastes. And we've actually got a ground climate that kind of works in the battle map for that, though it sort of depends on where you actually fight. But yeah, so basically this is Nurgle's main area. He has these sort of impassable pits of plague gunk surrounding his citadel. And then, of course, further to the west, at the very edge, is you have another pillar of magical energy. And then, of course, Slaanesh, the Keep of Secrets, where, you know, he probably has his giant, crazy Slaanesh brothel, or whatever he has. He is the Prince of Pleasure, of course. And then, finally, at the very edge here, you have some lava flows that flow into the sea. And so this is the end of the Chaos Wastes. And basically, after that, you have an open ocean. You have the Isle of Albion here. This is basically an island of mysterious energies and lots of giants. So if you were to conquer Albion, you would basically gain access to recruiting giants on the campaign map. So that's a lot of fun. As well as, of course, some Albion warriors that are just sort of like... It's sort of like ancient England / kind of sort of Ireland, where it's like you have a lot of like stone circles and druids and stuff, and so Albion definitely has that kind of feel. And so finally, the stuff you've really been waiting for will have to wait actually. I'm going to show you the rest of the old world first, and then I'm going to show you the west. But down here you have, of course, the Chaos Dwarves. They're a really fun faction. I'm looking forward to them in the next Total War Warhammer release. I assume they're going to be the next one, or at least one of them. They've said they're going to have all of the 8th edition factions, and so I believe Chaos Dwarves will be in it. So fingers crossed, I'm looking forward to that. Anyways, up here you have their northern fortress of Uzkalak. It's up here in the mountains, surrounded by lava, because they are Chaos Dwarves and stuff. This is sort of the main bulwark against both the forces of Chaos. They're kind of sort of friends, but Chaos factions fight each other all the time. As well as over here you have the Ogre Kingdoms. Now the Mountains of Morn will not be in the map that much, but instead what you'll have is basically ogres starting here and marching from the mountains down into the lands of the Chaos Dwarves and the forces of Chaos. So at the start of the game, you'll have an ogre army that basically will be a full stack starting here, and you'll have a smaller Chaos Dwarf army against you, and basically the Chaos Dwarves will try to bribe you, and they'll say, hey, we'll give you money in exchange for you not attacking us, and you can take the money, and then you could betray them if you want to, or you could not march against someone else. Because basically the Chaos Dwarves, they're super rich, and so they're probably willing to bribe someone to not fight. But they'll definitely put up a good fight if they have to. They definitely have a lot of awesome weapons, like exploding crossbow bolts and blunderbusses, of course. Their blunderby are super badass. Anyways, further south, of course, you have Zara Nagrin. They're basically their main base. This area here is in this sort of depression in the middle of the Darklands, and it's pretty awesome. Further south, you just have basically the vast open plains of the Darklands, the Gates of Zar out in the middle of nowhere. Lava pits, you have the Sentinels. There are basically these random tall sort of stone pillars in the middle of the Darklands. Further south, you have the Tower of Gorgoth. This guards a whole bunch of really valuable mines, and it's basically going to be one of those stops along the Silk Road as well. You see, basically, capturing settlements in the Darklands will basically give you access to the Silk Road, which basically goes all the way to Far Cathay. And so from those Silk Road trading posts, you'll basically be able to recruit mercenaries from the east. Right now, we just have a spearman from Cathay, but in the long run, we might actually add more of these sort of eastern mercenaries that you could hire from the edge of the map here. Further south, we have the Black Fortress. In the actual lore, it's a little bit further to the east, but we figured we'd move it over a little bit because it's awesome and because it's really important. And then finally, you have the south here, and just so not much going on down here except, of course, the Tower of Nagash. One thing we got working here is we have these rebel stacks will actually be basically recruited in Nagashazar, and it'll basically the current version will not have it be Sylvanians as a sub-faction. Instead, it will basically be the actual undead of Nagash will create armies and march out to destroy the old world. So elsewhere we have the mountains, of course. This is basically the same as in 1.6. The dwarves, the orcs, and the night goblins and the Skaven will all be fighting over them in these high passes. We've extended them south, of course, and so basically you'll have Karak 8 Peaks, for example, Karak Azul, and further south here you have Goblin Fortress of Mount Spitepack, and Misty Mountain, the Floating Village, and a lot of other stuff going on here as well. And the Badlands, of course, are basically mostly pretty desolate, but you'll basically have huge armies of orcs all over the place, as well as some rebel orcs that are basically from different orc clans. So they're all going to be fighting here. And then to the south you have Kimri and the Tomb Kings. Now, as for this area, basically this is more or less going to be the same as what I showed you in earlier versions. You'll have 4 major cities: Lamia, Numas, Kemri, and Zandri. One cool thing is that over here, you have the Southlands, where basically there are some lizardmen in the Southlands, and so the Temple of Skulls here will basically be lizardmen controlled. And so the lizardmen and the Tomb Kings can fight if they want to. They don't start off at war, but they basically can end up fighting. So that's pretty fun. Over here, you have the Great Deserts of Araby with their various watering holes and oases, and then of course the Kingdom of Araby. Now, the Kingdom of Araby will basically be able to recruit armies and fight the Tomb Kings as a rebel sub-faction, and if you were to conquer them as a human, you can then recruit their units like elephants and desert lancers and such. So they're a lot of fun. I shrunk them down from what they used to be because they were a little bit too big and unwieldy, so now they're still a pretty big and spread out area, but nowhere near as bad as it was. Which of course brings us to the new improvement, Lustria. So Lustria is greatly improved from the original version. So basically, you'll have the Lizardmen, Skaven, and Vampires all fighting over the area. So here, Luther Harkin and his Vampire Corsairs will basically be on the Vampire Coast here, and they will be both attacking inland and raiding to the seas. You have, of course, the Volcano Islands, which is just sort of like a fun thing to include. And then you'll have the Skaven controlling the ruined cities of Chakwa and Axolotl. But to the north of that, you will have the Lizardmen cities, the proud cities of Tlax, Xanalupec, and Tlaxlan, with Tlaxlan being their capital. Now, in the lore, they don't really go into depth on a lot of what Tlaxlan looks like, so this lake here I actually added myself. See, the ancient Aztecs built their capital in the middle of a lake like this, and so I figured that would be sort of a cool thing to do in lieu of just having a city in the middle of the jungle. So, you also have these navigable rivers. So if any of you have basically wanted to, I don't know how many film buffs there are here, but basically if you guys have ever seen the movie Aguirre, the Power of the Wrath of God, you can basically sail down the Amazon River and, you know, destroy stuff and attack the lizard men and basically be an evil conquistador. To the north, you have Ulthuan, or at least half of it. You have the great port city here of Lothern. And then to the north of that, you have the Tower of Hoeth, Torre of Res, and basically all the major elven kingdoms saw their own province. North of there, of course, you have the Shadow Isles and the Shrine of Cain. Now, the Shrine of Cain is basically going to start controlled by the Dark Elves. The reason for that being that we basically want the Dark Elves and the High Elves to fight, and so this way the Dark Elves will attack Ulthuan and the High Elves will attack the Dark Elves. North of there, of course, you have Nagaroth. Now, actually, in southern Nagaroth, the High Elves have a colony of Arnheim. That's basically these nice, pleasant plains in southern Nagaroth. But north of that, it gets a little bit uglier. You, of course, have the great black forests of Chill Harbor. And then, of course, the Isles here in the Sea of Chill. And, of course, the most dangerous part of it, the Chaos Wastes. See, the Chaos Wastes, they stop here, but then they sort of go up around the North Pole and continue over here. So one thing that will happen is basically you will have Chaos armies spawning here in the Chaos Wastes and Ironfrost Glacier, and they'll basically then be marching down against the Dark Elves. So Harganeth and Grond will be on the front lines of the war against Chaos, and so the Dark Elves will basically have to leave garrisons and build watchtowers to keep an eye out for them. Of course, you have their main homeland here of Nagarond, and the great Blackspine Mountains that stretch all along the central Nagaroth. And then, of course, here you have the Red Desert and the Plain of Spiders, which is basically the furthest west part of Nagaroth. And a little bit further to the west, you have basically the Isle of Great Beasts and a lot of other cool stuff that was not able to fit in the current campaign map edition, but we might include it later. So yeah, that's Nagaroth. It's a lot of fun. So the Dark Elves will basically now be launching expeditions against both the High Elves as well as later the actual Old World, and you'll have an entire area to campaign on. So I believe that covers the entirety of the map. One thing that we've done is we've added scripts that will basically give you reasons to actually conquer faraway places. So like if you're Reichland, you have an incentive to basically stick around and basically sort of sit here and turtle up. Maybe attack like Marienburg if you want to, maybe attack elsewhere, but basically there's not a lot of incentive to go elsewhere. And so you'll basically get these scripts and all that will basically give you an incentive to, say, conquer the Norse raiders at Stromstad, or to seize the pirate bastion of Sartosa down here. And basically by conquering those places, you will then receive trade bonuses at all of your ports. And so basically by, say, if the Empire were to stop the pirates of Sartosa and take control there, those pirates stop raiding, and you now get trade bonuses, but only for you, because you now basically can send those pirates to go raid other people. And so that gives you reasons to actually march to distant places. Also, you will have quests, for example, saying, say, Lystria has cities made of gold, so you can basically go and steal the gold from Lystria, and so when you conquer cities here, you'll basically get this big cash influx. So it's worth it, even if they aren't actually, you know, of a ton of strategic value at the moment. So yeah, that is beginning of the end times. I'll be giving you more previews soon about other aspects of the mod, including one thing we've done is we basically added all 8 colleges of magic, and so basically you'll be able to, on the campaign map, build new colleges of magic from your cities. So that should be a lot of fun. So basically, it's if you can build, say, a Bright College, or a College of Metal, like the Lore of Metal, a College of Hish, like Light Magic, etc., and basically that will allow you to recruit those kind of wizards. And a lot of other cool stuff has been done as well. Oh, I forgot to show off Athelloren. Yeah, it's here nested into the great land of Bretonnia. And speaking of which, we added new castles for the Bretonians. But basically, Ethel Lauren, the Wood Elves will be there, and they'll have an incentive to basically sit around, but they will have to deal with beastmen attacking them, as well as, of course, as the world around them slowly falls, they'll basically become more and more drawn into it. See, during the end times, the High Elves and Dark Elves fled to, like, Lauren after Ulthuan collapsed, and so basically you'll have an incentive to, as the Wood Elves, you want to sit around at first, but eventually you basically want to become involved in the affairs of men and elves and other people. So yeah, that's mostly it for what I want to show you today. Hope you had a good time. Check out the other previews. Also check out that Milk and Cookies Total War and Grey Ghost have been posting a lot of really cool videos about the mod. So you can check them out for more info on units and balancing and stuff like that. But for the time being, Admiral Thrawn signing off.